11 years ago this week, back in 1988, one of the top hits in the USA was by Steve Winwood, a superstar who refused acting roles for 25 years until he agreed to become an actor to raise money for AIDS. I'll have details and that top hit after this.
Now on American Top 40, we're up to the hit by Steve Winwood, a survivor of the all-star group of the 60s who recorded a classic #1 album, then never recorded together again. Here's the story. Steve Winwood began his career in Birmingham, England when he was 16. He became the keyboard player and lead singer for the Spencer Davis Group. He sang on their 1967 top 10 hits, Gimme Some Lovin' and I'm a Man. Then he left the Spencer Davis Group and became a founding member of the popular album group Traffic. And when Traffic broke up, Steve Winwood joined legendary guitarist Eric Clapton and super drummer Ginger Baker, whose group Cream had just disbanded. With star bass player Rick Gretsch, the four musicians formed one of the most talked about bands of the late 60s, the all-star band called Blind Faith. Now, Blind Faith recorded only one album, an album that hit #1 in 1969 and became a million seller. Not long after its release, the group played a free concert in London's Hyde Park for more than 100,000 fans. Then there was a short U.S. concert tour. But within a few months, Blind Faith broke up. It was more than the four musicians could handle. The constant clashes between their huge egos and the constant hyping by the promoters. Now that was more than 15 years ago. Well, Steve Winwood went out and reformed his old group Traffic for a while. Then he recorded as a solo artist. Well, after a 5-year absence from the top 40, he's back in our countdown. From the Spencer Davis Group to Traffic to Blind Faith to Solo Star. Here's 38-year-old Steve Winwood at number 34 with Higher Love.
America's Top
11 years ago this week, back in 1988, one of the top hits in the USA was by a superstar who refused acting roles for 25 years until he agreed to become an actor to raise money for AIDS. Though Steve Winwood has been a rock legend since the mid-60s, he's never tried to parlay his musical success into acting success. Unlike Elvis, David Bowie, and others, he says he's not comfortable being anyone but himself. And then in 1989, he was asked by his old friend Elton John to give a hand. Elton was putting on a performance of the rock opera Tommy to raise money for AIDS research. Phil Collins was going to appear, so were Patti LaBelle and Billy Idol. Elton himself would be the Pinball Wizard. And Steve Winwood made his acting debut that night as the character called the Hawker. He says he was a nervous wreck. One acting job was more than enough. 11 years ago this week, Steve Winwood, much more comfortable being himself, had one of the top hits in the USA with Don't You Know What the Night Can Do.
American Top 40.
We're on our way to the #1 song of 1987. Well, now, here's a song about being able to appreciate the important things, the finer things in life, and it's by a man who has a reputation for discriminating taste. This singer hit big when he was just a teenager back in the 60s. Went on to play in bands like Traffic and Blind Faith. Then he disappeared from the charts for a while. But when he came back in 1986, he was bigger than ever. Listen to what Billy Joel said about him. Quote, "What a pleasure it is to hear the most distinctive white male voice of the 60s return completely intact to the 80s. Steve Winwood is proof that true quality and talent will always come through. He's Mr. Taste." End of quote. Well, Mr. Taste is showing his unerring instincts for quality once again. His song is the 76th biggest hit of the year, The Finer Things.
While there is time, American Top 40.
You're listening to American Top 40, the song setting hearts aflutter and feet a-flying across the floors of the USA. I'm Shadoe Stevens. And right here, right now, we've arrived. The peak of pop popularity, the #1 song in the USA. But before we unveil it, let's see what Billboard says are the #1s at the top of the other charts. #1 on the dance chart this week is The Right Stuff by Vanessa Williams. #1 on the black singles chart is Off on Your Own Girl by Al B. Sure. #1 on the country chart is Don't Close Your Eyes by Keith Whitley. And #1 on the album chart, regaining the top spot this week, is Hysteria by Def Leppard. Which brings us back to the pop chart and a song by a star born and bred in Britain, in the English town of Birmingham. But the sounds of American rhythm and blues and soul course through this lad's veins, inspiring him to early stardom on the British and American charts in bands like the Spencer Davis Group, Blind Faith, Traffic, and then solo. Finally, just a few years ago, he made the move to America, settling down in Nashville, where he soaked up some more of that Southern soul firsthand. And it's taken him right to the top. For the third week in a row, the number one song in the USA is by Steve Winwood. Roll with it.
American Top 40.
Now here's the story of how Steve Winwood's love for the music of a legendary artist led to his own musical success. It seems that Steve grew up in England in a house full of musical instruments. He'd been writing and playing music since his early teens, but then he bought a second-hand copy of the album Ray Charles in person. Steve told USA Today that the man called the genius of soul changed his life. He says, "Ray was my first idol. I was playing keyboards before I heard Ray, but he inspired me to sing." Soon young Wynwood had honed his voice into a pretty fair impression of his favorite singer. A musician named Spencer Davis heard about this teenager who could do an amazing Ray Charles impression and hired him to be the lead singer for his group. This led to hits like Gimme Some Lovin' and Keep On Runnin'. Though young Steve was developing his own style, you can still hear the Ray Charles influence on those records. Listen to this bit of the song, I'm a Man. After the Spencer Davis Group, Steve Winwood went on to form Blind Faith and Traffic, and today he's a solo star. Who knows? There might be some young singer out there who is just hired to join a band because he can sing just like Steve Winwood. Who knows? Well, anyway, here's Steve's sweet and soulful tenor at number 20 in our countdown. Don't you know what the night can do?
Casey's Top 40.
These are the 40 biggest hits in the USA.
Number 34.
Falling 12 notches this week is Steve Winwood, who started his solo career as a one-man band, playing all the instruments on his first solo albums. But in 1986, he started working with other musicians, and his last two studio albums, Back in the High Life and Roll With It, have given him a total of 7 big hits. At number 34 this week, here's one of them, Steve Winwood's Holding On.
Casey's Countdown.
I'm Casey Kasem. We're on our way to this week's number one song on the Adult Contemporary chart. Now, here's the song that was number one on the pop chart 9 years ago this week, back in 1988. It's by Steve Winwood, a musical prodigy who practically took over the VH1 Honors Show this past April. In the course of the 3-hour program, Steve managed to squeeze in performances with Chaka Khan, Stevie Wonder, James Taylor, Sheryl Crow, and Levon Helm of the band. Now, here's a song that kept Steve Winwood busy on the charts. His number one smash, Roll With It.
America's Top Hits.
11 years ago this week, back in 1987, one of the top hits in the USA was by a musical prodigy who was a star by the time he was 15 years old. He was lead singer, lead guitarist, and keyboard player for a major British rock band. He began his professional career at age 14 when he joined a British group called the Muff Woody Jazz Band. Within a year, that group had turned into the Spencer Davis Group, and the band's 15-year-old lead singer was on his way to superstardom. He went on to form supergroups Traffic and Blind Faith before finally moving into a solo career. And today, at the age of 49, he spent more than 2/3 of his life as a professional musician. 11 years ago this week, he had one of the top hits in the USA. Here's Steve Winwood with The Finer Things.
America's Top Hits.
This week back in 1986, one of the top hits in the USA was Higher Love. It's one of the songs that lifted the career of a longtime rock legend out of the musical doldrums. It was back in 1963 that 15-year-old Steve Winwood joined the Spencer Davis Group, which led to high-flying bands like Traffic and Blind Faith. For most of his career, Steve Winwood was a member of some very successful bands. But in the 70s, he decided it was time to go solo. At first, he had only marginal success. Then, in 1981, he finally hit with his solo song, While You See a Chance. But that looked like it was going to be Steve's only solo hit until he finally broke through with the song that started him on a roll of one big hit after another. This week, back in 1986, that breakthrough song was one of the top hits in the USA. Here's Steve Winwood with Higher Love.
Counting them down with Casey Kasem.